Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you guys are doing good. I hope this lockdown is treating you nicely. Okay, in today's video, we're gonna solve Delhi University's 2018 MA English entrance question paper. Apart from this, anybody who wants to get hold of JNU's 2019 question paper, I'll be posting all the links down there in the description box. You may check out the complete JNU series as well, and meanwhile we'll also try solving Delhi University's 2018 question paper. Also, one more thing, I won't be solving the entire question paper in a go, so please wait for the other set of videos as well. But today we're gonna look at the first few questions. Let's see how much time it takes, and accordingly we'll be posting more videos on this question paper only. Okay, you may just keep on checking the links. I'll be posting the links in the description box. Right, here we have 2018 question paper now. Let's look at question number 1. Let's see what it says. It says, which one of the following is or are true about Shakespeare's problem plays? Okay, so we have to keep in mind while we're looking at this question that they're asking about Shakespeare's problem plays, right? Number 1, they explore ignoble aspects of human nature. Number 2, they deal with some moral problems. Number 3, they challenge generic categorization. Number 4, the resolution of the plot seems to be problematic in these plays. Right, so we have 4 sets here. A, 1 or 2, B, only 4, C, 3, 2 or 4, or D, all of these. Now, what do you do the moment you see or the moment you encounter a question like this? You should know that Shakespeare, he wrote comedies, number 1. Number 2, he wrote tragedies. Number 3, he also wrote historical plays. Number 4, he wrote problem plays. Now, this kind of question I remember I've already done with you guys in the class, and some of you came out with the correct answers. So today you've got something in relation to problem plays. Tomorrow you might get something in relation to whatever XYZ thing about Shakespeare. So your attitude towards Shakespeare counts here, right? So you don't have to go by rote method and think, okay, in 2018 they have asked us something in relation to problem plays, so they're gonna ask us something similar the next time. No, yeah, maybe something similar, but maybe in a different way, so your concepts should be clear again. So here, if you know what problem plays are, you'll be able to identify the answers. Number 1, the problem plays, the kind of problem plays that Shakespeare wrote were neither comedy nor tragedy. They were, number 2, they were deep, dark, and they dealt with psychological issues in general. For example, if anybody of you has read this play called Measure for Measure by Shakespeare, what happens in that play? There is this character. Okay, I'm giving you this story so that it becomes easy for you to solve this question. Now, there is this character called Isabella. She's stuck in this dilemma in the entire play. You see, she's offered a choice that she either sleeps with this guy called Angelo, who is the deputy governor, in exchange for her brother's freedom from prison. Okay, now here, what do you recognize? What do you identify with this story? You remember that this entire plot is categorized by a very ambiguous ambiguous tone, very uncertain tone. And this is what these options are also about. If you keep Isabella in your mind, what is happening? Yes, they explore ignoble aspects of mind, they deal with moral problems. Okay, so Isabella, she's stuck in between. They also challenge, the resolution of the plot seems to be problematic. This is what I said. It's uncertain, it's ambiguous in nature. So you don't need to think much about it when you know all of these characteristics, all of these. Okay, then now question number 2, which of the following is or are true about Shakespeare's major tragic characters? I remember I've discussed this question with you comprehensively in the class, so I'm not going to go deep into it. Let's look at the options. Complex and capable of surprising us? Yes. Developed throughout the play? Yes. Deep mutual relation and claim our sympathy? So much. Remember King Lear? We do sympathize with him in the end. Number 4, come to a realization by the end of the play. Again, he does realize his own folly. So we are not going to think much about it. It's going to be all of these. Okay, now let's move on towards next question. It says a doodle means a slogan on a wall, B line drawing made to invoke laughter, C rough drawing made absent-mindedly, or D doddering person. Again, a very general question. If you read newspaper, you will be able to identify it. For doodle, you don't even need to read a newspaper. It's a general thing. Okay, so it's gonna be C, rough drawing made absent-mindedly. Okay. Okay, now moving on towards question number 4. Alright, now let's look at question number 4. It says, identify the wrong combination of author and book. A. White Tiger, Hanif Qureshi. Silence. We all know that this is the right answer. White Tiger is written by Aravind Adiga. Okay, so you have to identify the wrong combination. For Whom the Bell Tolls, Ernest Hemingway. Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, and The Inheritance of Loss by Kiran Desai. Now, White Tiger is what? It's a novel by Aravind Adiga. This novel also won the 40th Man Booker Prize. This novel sheds light on India's class struggle through its character called Balram. Adiga, he himself explains the novel in his own words, and he says that this novel is an attempt to catch the voice of the men you meet as you travel through India, the voice of the colossal underclass. So, you cannot get an easier question than this. Moving on, question number 5, let's see what it says. One feature that we easily notice about Shakespeare's tragedy is their verbosity, because now what is verbosity? Use of excessive words. A. Tragedy comes with an unspeakable element. It does. B. Its characters struggle for meaning. We see all the characters, most of the characters of Shakespeare, they struggle for meaning throughout the play. 3. The characters are charismatic speakers. Yes, there is no doubt about it. They are very charismatic. 4. They address fundamental problems of human experience. They do. All his plays. So, again, we don't need to think about it. It's gonna be all of these, right? Alright, now let's look at question number 6. It says, in Elizabethan play, a Machiavelli character is A. A stage villain full of cunning, calculation, wickedness, and selfishness. B. A character threatening to create political chaos and disorder. C. A historical figure. Or D. A pupil of Machiavelli. Now see, you cannot solve this question unless you know what a Machiavelli character is. I'll first of all help you in understanding what a Machiavelli character is, and then we'll move on towards solving this question. Now there was this guy called Niccolo Machiavelli. He was an Italian Renaissance diplomat, philosopher, and writer. Okay, he was majorly known for his work called The Prince, which was, I think, written in 1513. And he's also called the father of modern philosophy, or the father of political science. Now, I'll give you one definition. Please listen to this definition clearly. According to Collins Dictionary, a Machiavellian character, or a Machiavellian, any Machiavellian, is an immoral, cunning person, especially a politician. Okay, so you got to understand the relation of a Machiavellian character to politics. Now look at these options. You understand that a stage villain full of cunning, calculation, wickedness, and selfishness is going to be the right answer. But what after that? What is the other option? Is it going to be all of these or one of these, that is A, C, or D? Now I've already told you that this character is an immoral, cunning person, especially a politician. Look at the option number 2. A character threatening to create political chaos and disorder. Now if you know the relationship of a Machiavellian character to politics, you'll be able to identify the correct answer, that is 1 and 2. A is going to be the right answer. So not only cunning or wicked or selfish in nature, but this character is also related to politics. So option number A, that is 1 and 2, they're going to be our right answers. Alright, now let's look at question number 7. It says, what is the concept of negritude? A. It was introduced to post-call studies by Edward Said. B. It was introduced to post-call studies by Frantz Fanon. C. It linked black people across Africa, the Caribbean and the USA around a set of humanist values that were supposedly held by the blacks world over. Or D. It seeks to study the experiences of blacks in colonial powers. Now here, number one thing that we need to understand is what negritude basically refers to. Now this word, it itself refers to self-affirmation of black people, wherein they seek answers to the questions like, what are we doing in this white world? What is my existence about? Okay. Now there was this guy called Leon Demas. He was one of the co-founders of this negritude movement, and he co-founded this movement along with two other important people. One is Amici and another one is Leopold Senghor. Okay, now these guys together they formed this negritude movement, wherein they also discussed the aftermath of colonization. Okay, today you have colonization, what about things after that? Okay, now if you look at any of these theories in one or the other way, these theories, they're trying to talk about their individual set of experiences. So experiences is a very important word when you see questions from such places. So the answer here undoubtedly it goes to, it's going to be, wait a minute, D, that it seeks to study the experiences of blacks in colonial powers. Alright, now let's look at question number 8. It says, what is the study of poetic meter and form called? A. Eulogy, B. Tautology, C. Prosody, or D. Rhetoric. Prosody, of course, is the right answer here. Prosody, it's the study of poetic meter or patterns of rhythm or sound as we call it. But you should, nevertheless, you should know the meaning of all these words. Eulogy, it's a sort of tribute to someone who has died. Tautology, it's the repetitive use of phrases or words that have similar meanings. In order to help you understand this, I'll give you an example. Let's say if I say, your essay is completely devoid of creativity. So I'm using completely also here, I'm using devoid also here. Both words, they have similar meaning, completely devoid. Okay, so completely and devoid also. So repetitive use of phrases or words that have similar meanings. And rhetoric, of course, is the art of persuasive speech. But here the answer is going to be C, that is prosody. It's the study of poetic meter or patterns of rhythm or sound. Alright, now let's look at question number 9. It says, realism stands for 1. A literary movement in 19th century. 2. A mode to represent life and experience in literature. 3. The depiction of subject with scientific objectivity. Or 4. The depiction of life as it really is. Let's look at the options. Option number A, 1, 2 and 4. B, 1, 2 and 3. C, all of these, or D, 2, 3 and 4. Now let's use elimination technique here. If we know what realism is, of course it was a literary movement in 19th century. So 1 should be there. In any case, 1 should be there. So we're going to eliminate D quickly here because there is no 1. Now let's keep A and B on hold and also C. Okay, let's see if all of these are there. Option number 2, it says a mode to represent life and experience in literature. Again, option number 2 is also correct. It was a mode to represent life and experience in literature. So again, we have A and B on hold as well as C. Now let's look at option number 3. It says the depiction of subject with scientific objectivity. Okay. Option number 4, the depiction of life as it really is. This is undoubtedly the right option because realism, it depicts things as they are. Okay, so option number 4 is going to be the right one. Now let's again look at these two options. We know option number 4 is the right one, so we're going to eliminate B. Now what is remaining? Either option number A or C. Okay, 1, 2 and 4 or all of these. We will have to cross check option number 3, that is depiction of subject with scientific objectivity. Is it the right one? No, it is not. This option should be immediately eradicated. Why? Because this option, that that is the depiction of subject with scientific objectivity, this very point, it corresponds to the definition of naturalism, which too began in 19th century, where writers used scientific techniques, whereas in realism they depicted things as they were. Okay, now here your basic understanding between naturalism and realism counts. If you know that realism was about the depiction of life as it really was, and naturalism involved the depiction of subject with scientific objectivity, you'll get your answer right. So A should be the right answer, that is 1, 2 and 4. Literary movement, mode to represent life, and the depiction of life as it really is. Let's look at question number 10 now. Arrange the art history periods in the correct sequence. 1. Renaissance, 2. Medieval, 3. Baroque, 4. Mannerism. Okay, see here the correct answer is going to be D, because see, first of all medieval ages they come, so medieval. Okay, then after medieval ages you have Renaissance, then after Renaissance you have Mannerism, because if you know, Mannerism is also known as late Renaissance. If you know this much, you will be able to identify your options. Fourth, it's going to be Baroque in 1740s. Mannerism comes in 1520s, and Renaissance before that, and medieval ages much before Renaissance. So 2, that is medieval, then 1, that is Renaissance, then 4, that is Mannerism, and third option is going to be third itself, Baroque in 1740s. What is Baroque? It's an extravagant ornamental sort of writing that was heavily used by writers like John Milton, John Donne, or George Herbert as well. So this is going to be the correct sequence: medieval ages, Renaissance, Mannerism, and then Baroque. Option number D is going to be the right answer here. Question number 11 now, assertion reason question. You do get such kind of questions in your examination. Assertion, it says, lyric poetry expresses the thoughts and feelings of the poet and is at times contrasted with narrative poetry and verse drama, which relate events in the form of a story. Reason, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre relates events in the form of a story and therefore is a perfect example of a lyric poetry. A, both A and R are true. Okay, if they are true, then you also need to identify if A is the correct explanation for R. A is false and R is true. Both A and R might be true, and A is the correct explanation for R. A and R might be true, but A is not the correct explanation for R. Now here, if you look at assertion, we'll first of all identify if this assertion is true or not. What is lyric poetry? Lyric poetry, of course, it does express personal emotions and feelings, right? It does. Aristotle was the first guy who identified 3 kinds of poetry. One was lyrical, another was dramatic, third was epic. So lyrical, dramatic, epic. Please remember this. And this assertion is also saying the same thing. It expresses the thoughts and feelings of the poet. I just told you lyric poetry is equals to the personal emotions and feelings of the poet. So assertion is true, we confirmed. Reason, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre relates events in the form of a story. Yes, it does, and is therefore is a perfect example of lyrical poetry. I just told you lyrical poetry or lyric poetry, it expresses the personal emotions and feelings, and Jane Eyre is about that. So if you look at option number D, both A and R might be true, but A is not the correct explanation for R. Why? Because assertion is just talking about lyrical poetry. Reason also might be true, but they are not in sync with each other, because in the end Bronte's Jane Eyre is a novel. Okay, so they might be true, but that is not the correct explanation for the reason that they have given us. Okay, it does not strongly take in the reason. The assertion does not very strongly take in the reason that they have given us about lyric poetry. So D is going to be the correct answer. That is, they might be true in their own places, but that's not the correct explanation for the reason that they have given us, right? Question number 12. Again, I've discussed this question very comprehensively with you guys in the class, if you remember. Plato's Republic introduces the principle of specialization. The result then is that more plentiful and better quality goods are more easily produced if each person, let's look at these lines, if each person does one thing for which he is naturally suited, does it at the right time, and is released from having to do any of the others. Okay, the principle of specialization, you should know what was Plato's principle of specialization. Refers to A, everyone does that to which their nature best suits them and not meddle in any other business. B, everyone does that to which their nature best suits them and interfere in other traits as well. C, everyone should act against, please keep a note of these words, okay? Interfere, act against. Herein lies your answer. Everyone should act against his or her nature to diverge themselves, but should not meddle in any other business. D, everyone should act against their nature to diverge themselves and interfere in other traits. What will you do? Now, if you know what Plato said in his book 1 of Republic, he said, this was the work wherein he gave the principle of specialization, book 1 of Republic, where he explained that the nature and structure of the society can be maintained properly if everyone does that to which their nature best suits them. Herein lies your answer. If you know what is the principle of specialization by Plato, you will know the answer. Everyone does that to which their nature best suits them and not meddle in any other business. For example, if you are a teacher, then just do your job, okay? Because if you will do your job, that will help in maintaining the structure of the society. If you are an actor, just act, don't teach, okay? If you are a counselor, only counsel, don't teach. Now, counseling and teaching, they are both different things, right? So whatever your job is, just do that. And that is the principle of specialization by Plato. And why should that be done? Because that helps in maintaining the structure of the society. So A is going to be the right answer. B, if you look at it, everyone does that to which their nature best suits them and interfere. Of course, no interference. Should act against his or her nature to diverge themselves, but should not. So against his or her nature, if you're a teacher and if you are not working as a teacher, you're working as a counselor, then again you're acting against your nature. Everyone should act against their nature to diverge themselves and interfere in other traits. No, you should not be interfering in other traits as well. Very obvious options. You don't even need to think about it if you know what the principle of specialization refers to. So A, that is, everyone does that to which their nature best suits them and not meddle in any other business. This is what the principle of specialization by Plato in his book 1 of Republic refers to. So A is going to be the correct answer. Alright, now let's look at question number 13. It says, match list 1 with list 2 and choose the appropriate option from the quotes given below. So you have list 1 on one side and 2 on the other. The world is my oyster, right? The world cannot be your oyster. It's a direct comparison. There is a hidden meaning in it. So it's gonna be metaphor. Then vines wove their delicate fingers together. It's gonna be personification. It's a figure of speech that attributes human characteristics to non-living things. My mouth was as dry as a bone. The moment you see as or like in any sentence, you should be able to identify that it's going to be simile. And then you snore louder than a freight train. Of course, it's an exaggerated statement, okay? Any statement that is, number one, exaggerated in nature, any statement that you cannot take literally, that is always a hyperbole. So B should be the right answer. Alright, now question number 14. Fill in the blank with the appropriate option. Dash is an avant-garde movement based primarily in France that seeks to break down the boundaries between rational and irrational, conscious and unconscious. Please notice these two words, between rational and irrational, conscious and unconscious. If you read your statements correctly, you'll be able to identify your answers. Through a variety of literary and artistic movements. What was Surrealism? It was a 20th century movement in arts and literature that sought to understand the potential of the unconscious. And here they have clearly mentioned this, right? So Surrealism is going to be your right answer here. What was existentialism? Existentialism emphasized on the human existence and that each individual is responsible for giving meaning to his or her life. It is not the responsibility of the society to add meaning to your life, rather your own responsibility. And this movement became popular during World War II. Then what is magic realism? Now look at these two words, magic also, realism, coming out from reality. So both the two words, they're contradictory in nature. It is any fiction where you see realistic elements of the modern world along with the addition of magical elements. Okay, and it is also considered as a subgenre of fantasy. You see this technique being used in the works of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who wrote this beautiful work called 100 Years of Solitude, or Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children. So these were the guys who used magic realism in their works. Then you have atheism, very easy, we all know that it is the absence, absence of God, okay, absence of belief in gods. So that is atheism. So yeah, Surrealism is the right answer here. They're talking about conscious vs unconscious. It's a very easy statement. Now let's move on towards next question. Match list 1 with list 2 and choose the appropriate option from the quotes given below. So you again have list 1 on one side and list 2 on the other. The first one is prima facie. It's a legal word. If you read a lot of newspaper, or if you read in general also, you'll be able to identify the meanings of these words. Okay, so prima facie is a legal word, number 1. So if you know that it's a legal word, you'll be able to identify, because option number 2 already mentions proven, accepted as so until proven otherwise. Then you have carte blanche, it's unlimited authority. Carpe diem, as we all know, it's a very popular, this thing sees the day, and then vox populi is the public opinion. Here option number C is the right one. Now we have question number 16. Again, list 1, list 2. Match list 1 with list 2 and choose the appropriate option from the codes given below. So you have list 1 on one side and 2 on the other. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, we all know his very famous poem Christabel. Then William Blake, he wrote Auguries of Innocence. P.B. Shelley, he wrote again a very popular poem Ozymandias. And William Combe, he wrote The Tour of Dr. Syntax. Here your option number D is going to be the right answer. Okay, now question number 17. Again, you have list 1 on one side and list 2 on the other. First we have One Part Women by Perumal Murugan. I remember I've done this work with you. So yeah, then you have The Gypsy Goddess by Meena Kandasme, Untouchable God by Kanchailai, and Unclaimed Terrain by Ajay Navaria. So B, option number B is going to be the right option. Question number 18 now. The end of a work of art is simply to exist in its formal perfection, that is, to be beautiful and to be contemplated as an end in itself. Look at it, to be beautiful and to be contemplated as an end in itself. Here it talks about two things. Please don't get confused when you read the options. The options are going to be tricky. Based on this statement, certain inferences are given below. Identify the ones which completely approximates with this statement. Number 1, it says this statement stresses on the form of the work, hence this can be read as a mouthpiece of formalistic criticism. 2, this statement has similarities to the rallying crying of aestheticism. 3, then you have this statement stresses the religion of beauty as posited by Flaubert and Mallarmé. 4, this statement anticipates the theory of the new critiques, which highlight the autonomy and the artistry of a work of art. Now, if you've read the statement correctly, it not only talks about the work being an end in itself, but also talks about the beauty of the work. If you will consider this statement, that is statement number 2, and if you've read aestheticism as a whole, and if you've read or studied new criticism on a whole, you will immediately you will eliminate option number 1, where it talks about it being a mouthpiece of formalistic criticism, and option number 4, where again it says that it anticipates the theory of the new critics. If you've studied these two concepts nicely, that is new criticism and aesthetism, you will immediately eliminate these two options. Now, if you've studied, then you will immediately mark option number A, that is 2 and 3. It, of course, it not only talks about the beauty, but it also talks about the work being an end in itself. And this term is credited to this person called Théophile Gautier, and the term itself advocates a philosophy that the true value of any artwork is devoid of any didactic, moral, or political function. And of course, it was accepted by Flaubert and Mallarmé. So 2 and 3, they're gonna be your correct answers here. That is option number A, only 2 and 3. In number 19, now you have list 1 on one side again, list 2 on the other. Bharat, he wrote this work called Natya Shastra. If you've read Indian aesthetic theory, you'll be able to identify the correct answer to it. If you know even one, in questions like these where you have list 1 and list 2, you can cross check the right answers. So Bharat's Natya Shastra. Then for Anand Vardhan, it's Dhanya Loka. I remember I've given you a note on it. Then we have Bharatari, who wrote Vakyapedia. Then you have Kuntak, who wrote Vakrokti Jivita. Please excuse my Sanskrit pronunciation. So for Bharat, you should study Indian aesthetic theory in order to understand what his Natya Shastra was about, because this was one of the most popular works when you talk about Indian theories. Then you have another guy, Anand Vardhan. He was a famous Sanskrit literary critic. He wrote a text called Dhanya Loka, wherein he gave the term Dhwani. Okay, this term Dhwani refers to some hidden meaning, which is also the soul of the poetry. Then this third person, Bharatari, he was again a very popular Sanskrit writer who wrote two important works. One work is called Satyakatraya. I'll give you the spelling, it's Satakatraya, and another work, as you can see here, is Vakyapedia. In this work, Vakyapedia, he talks about Sanskrit language in terms of its grammar and linguistic philosophy. Then this fourth guy, Kuntak, he wrote this work called Vakrokti Jivita, as you can see here. Here in this work, he gave us this term called Vakrokti. Vakrokti is the term that he gives us in his work, Vakrokti Jivita. That refers to the creative faculty of a writer, without which you cannot bring aesthetic delight in your work. So in order to bring aesthetic delight, one needs to possess Vakrokti. Okay. So yeah, this is it here. Option number C is the right option. Question number 20 now. Read the passage given below and fill in the blanks with the appropriate sequence of sentences. Foster's lifelong refusal to permit his novel to be filmed begins to look rather sensible, but once a revisionist enterprise gets underway, the mere wishes of a dead novelist provide no obstacle. The continuing decline, the growing poverty, and the meanness of spirit of much of Thatcherite Britain encourages many Britons to turn their eyes nostalgically to the lost hour of their precedents. The recrudescence of imperialist ideology and the popularity of Raj fictions put one in mind of the phantom twitchings of the amputated limb. In which it begins once again to strut and posture like a great power, while in fact its power diminishes every year. The jewel in the crown is made these days of paste. So here you have 4 options. And based on the four options, they've given you four choices, and you got to select one out of the four choices that you have based on the four options. Now if you look at option number 2, it says, if you have any idea about Thatcherite Britain, this entire process, it proved the point, or it basically refers to this Thatcherite Britain, the word that they have used. This is a very important word because just before this you have a blank. Okay, just before this very statement, the continuing decline, the growing poverty, and the meanness of spirit of much of Thatcherite Britain, you have a blank here. So you got to connect this very idea, because this is the idea in relation to Thatcherite Britain that runs in the entire first paragraph. Now this very concept, Thatcherite Britain, it basically refers to the political ideologies of Britain that encouraged British people to prioritize their glorious past after the devastation caused by World War II. So if you look at option number 2 here, let's take the great out of Britain, that the idea of a Great Britain has bedeviled the actions of all post-war governments. So option number 2 very much fits in this blank. Now if you read option number 3, Britain is in danger of entering a condition of cultural psychosis. What is cultural psychosis here? That we are still great. These British people, they think that we are still great. Despite decolonization happening in all the Asian, African countries, they still feel that we are great, whilst their power is diminishing around the world. And if you look at the last line, in which it begins once again to strut and posture like a great power, while in fact its power diminishes every year. In this line, this very line, you have your answer. Now look at it. Read option number 3 again. Britain is in danger of entering a condition of cultural psychosis. So option number 2 and 3, that is B, this one is going to be correct. Now if you look at option number 4, but it was Margaret Thatcher. See, option number 4, in any case you cannot fit this option here because they've stopped talking about Thatcher here. Okay, so option number 4 is wrong. Option number 4 cannot be applied to blank number 2. Okay, it cannot be at all applied to blank number 2. Even in blank number 1 you cannot apply it because it does not talk about anything in relation to what the paragraph is talking about. If you read it, but it was Margaret Thatcher who, in the euphoria of Falklands victory, most plainly nailed her colors to the old colonial mast, claiming that the success in the South Atlantic proved that the British were still the people who had ruled a quarter of the world. It does give you a history of Britain, but it does not altogether justifies the statement as much as option number 2 does. It is stronger than option number 4, that if you take out the great out of the Great Britain, the very idea of Great Britain comes to a halt. It ceases, their power ceases. Okay, so option number 2 and 3. Now if you look at option number 1, that is, and there can be little doubt that in the Britain today the re-establishment or the refurbishment of the empire's tarnished image is underway. So here this very word, little doubt, it favors the statement. Okay, it favors the statement in a negative way. So option number 1 is absolutely correct because they here say that there is a little doubt but you see the entire paragraph is talking about the diminishing power of the Britain. Okay, so 2 and 3, they are the best suited answers for this paragraph that you have. If you're preparing for JNU's entrance examination, then I'm posting all the links down there in the description box. Please check out the links, complete set of links on JNU series as well. I'll see you later maybe. Take care.